Kate McCann stated in her book that she washed Madeleine's pyjamas on the Thursday morning, the 3rd of May 2007, the day she says Madeleine was abducted. She said it was to wash away a tea stain. After Madeleine was reported missing, the McCanns gave the police a description of the pyjamas in which Madeleine was said to have been stolen from her bed. This photograph appeared in several British newspapers 6 days after Madeleine's reported disappearance. And because the image had been supplied to the press by the Portuguese police, people assumed it was a police photograph taken by the Portuguese police. The image is not, in fact, an official police photograph. It was supplied to the police by the McCanns or somebody associated with the McCanns. In the released Portuguese police files is a note by Detective Constable Markley of Leicestershire Police, written on or after the 8th of May, exhibiting a black and white copy of this photograph, among others, and headed "Information from the Family." About a month after the image was featured in the media, on the 5th of June on Crime Watch, and again 2 days later at a press conference in Amsterdam, Gerry McCann held up the very same pair of pyjamas. We know they are the same because they share identical imperfections due to having been worn. At this press conference, the McCanns claimed that these pyjamas belonged to Madeleine's then 2-year-old sister, and that they were producing them because they were similar to those Madeleine was wearing when abducted. These pyjamas were most likely from the 2006 range of Marks & Spencer's Eeyore pyjamas, when Madeleine's sister was little more than 1 year old. It is plain that they are far too large to have been bought for someone so young. Even Madeleine's sister herself confirmed they were not hers. Gerry's brother, John McCann, speaking to the media days after Madeleine was reported missing, said that Kate was dressing her in a pair of her sister's pyjamas, and she exclaimed, "Maddie's jammies! Where is Maddie?" So there are several lines of evidence that the pyjamas Gerry is holding up, which are the same pyjamas in this image, in fact belonged to Madeleine and not to her younger sister. These are the very same pyjamas that Kate McCann said she washed on the morning they said Madeleine was taken. So if Madeleine's pyjamas were not abducted, neither was Madeleine. The reasons why we now know these pyjamas belonged to Madeleine are explained in more detail in these two articles, an article by Madeleine McCann researcher Dr. Martin Roberts and one by Nigel Moore, and I'd like to thank them for their detailed research. Kate said she washed Madeleine's pyjamas on the morning of the day they reported her missing. The pyjamas in this photograph show signs that they are still damp. The blue background cloth in the image is identical to the furniture in the McCann's apartment. If it is true that Kate washed Madeleine's pyjamas on the morning of the 3rd of May 2007, then the McCanns themselves may have taken this photograph on the morning of the day they said she was abducted, ready to hand it to the Portuguese police after the planned abduction hoax which was to follow.
I'm looking for younger sisters that are a little bit smaller than Madeleine's. As you can see, it's a pink top with an character of the oil and short sleeves. White pyjamas off to the floor, pretty fun, and another picture of the oil on the right leg, lower right leg. So as I say, these are virtually identical to what Madeline was wearing, only they're a little bit smaller.
This is my 4th release of films exploring the mystery of the alleged disappearance of Madeleine McCann and how Britain's mainstream media have for 10 years withheld from the public many key facts surrounding what happened. In my first set of films, I set out hundreds of facts which to me suggest Madeleine died in her parents' holiday apartment in Praia da Luz and that they, perhaps helped by others for whatever reason, covered up her death. I examined the findings of one of the world's top dog handlers, Martin Grime. His cadaver and blood dogs between them made 17 alerts to the past presence of a corpse and blood. I discussed the McCann's reactions to these dramatic findings.
This is the first time that you give us a big interview, not being Arguidos since then. So now I feel free to ask you this directly. How can you explain the coincidence of the scent of the cadaver felt by British and not Portuguese dogs?
Sandra, maybe you should be asking the judiciary because they've examined all of it.
But don't you have an explanation
we're
for
obviously
that?
Madeleine's mum and dad, and we're desperate for people to help us find Madeleine, which is why we're here today. The majority of people are inherently good, and I believe the majority of people in Portugal are inherently good people, and we're asking them if they'll help us spread this message to that person or people.
So you don't have any explanation for that?
Ask the dogs, Sandra.
Ask the dogs, no, Jerry. Now I think that I feel free to ask you.
They also claimed the dogs had only alerted to dirty nappies or rotting meat. I dealt with mountains of circumstantial evidence which, in my opinion, implicate the McCanns and some of their friends in the cover-up of Madeleine's death. There were irreconcilable contradictions between witness statements. In one case, with the alleged visit of the McCann's friend David Payne to the McCann's apartment at 6:30 p.m, the night Madeleine was reported missing, I identified no fewer than 20 contradictions. I noted several changes of story about the events of the 3rd of May. Whether the apartment was broken into or not, whether the patio door was left unlocked or not, whether the McCanns entered by the front door or not. I looked at changes of story about how the wind was supposed to have blown the curtains open and closed the door shut when Kate McCann supposedly did her 10 p.m. check. I also delved into the extraordinary range of individuals and agencies used by the McCann team for their private investigation. Most of them were thoroughly disreputable, and some turned out to be crooks. Two of them, Antonio Gimenez Raso and Kevin Halligan, each spent 4 years in jail on charges respectively of corruption in public office and a $1.5 million fraud. Another, Gary Hagland, was an expert in advising companies on avoiding being accused of money laundering. Others had connections with MI5 and the British Security Services. I then went on to examine the huge involvement of the British establishment in the case from day one. Tony Blair's chief media advisor, Clarence Mitchell, was on the case from the early days. He once boasted that his job was to control what comes out in the media. An assortment of PR men, lawyers, British police and security services, criminal profilers from MI5 and others also descended on Praia de Luz in the first few days. The Metropolitan Police Force's supposed 6-year-long investigation, Operation Grange, which began in 2011, was set up after Rebecca Brooks, then the CEO of Rupert Murdoch's News International empire, manipulated David Cameron into action after reportedly threatening him with a week of bad headlines about Theresa May. And it seems now that Operation Grange was never intended to be a real investigation. It was another intelligence tool with which to mislead the public into accepting a bogus abduction claim. Grange was a psychological operation, a psyop. In fact, the whole case has been a 10-year-long psyop. In my second release, I highlighted what I called 4 phantom abductors. I exposed the claim by Nuno Lourenço that a Polish holidaymaker, Wojciech Krakowski, had tried to kidnap Lourenço's young daughter as an obvious fabrication. I showed how his false claim derailed the Portuguese police investigation in its early stages. I then presented evidence that the McCann's friend, Jane Tanner, had fabricated her claim of seeing a man carrying a child near the McCann's apartment at 9:15 p.m. the night Madeleine was reported missing. After that, I showed that Martin Smith and family from Ireland, who claimed to have seen a man carrying a child at 10 p.m. that night, contacted me to distance himself from Robert Murat, but then failed to reply to my follow-up questions about their alleged sighting. As far as I'm aware, the Smiths have never gone on camera with their account. If they wanted to clear things up about whether they knew Robert Murat, why couldn't they clear up some very basic unanswered questions about what they said they saw? For these reasons, in my opinion, their account remains another possible fabrication. Finally, I examined the claim by DCI Redwood from the Met's Operation Grange to have found the person that Jane Tanner claimed she saw. He claimed that 6 years after the event, this man had come forward to say that he had been carrying a child home from the night creche that night. Was this man living without a television in a hole in the ground for the previous 6 years? He has never been named, and I believe DCI Redwood should be arrested and charged with perverting the course of justice, as I am fully convinced this was yet another piece of fabricated evidence. In my third release, titled When Madeleine Died, I examined every claimed sighting of Madeleine working backwards from 10 p.m. on the Thursday the 3rd of May. None of the sightings could be verified until I reached a detailed sighting by a cleaner who had clearly observed the entire McCann family, including Madeleine, at lunchtime on Sunday the 29th of April. With the help of a retired police superintendent who has studied the Madeleine McCann case for the past 10 years, I was able to present convincing evidence that the so-called last photo of Madeleine, which the McCanns said was taken at 2:29 p.m. on the Thursday the 3rd of May, was probably taken at lunchtime 4 days earlier on Sunday the 29th of April. I have concluded there is no credible evidence from other witnesses independent of the McCanns and their friends that Madeleine was seen alive after Sunday. In November 2016, I travelled to the United States to get the opinion of highly respected statement analyst Peter Hyatt, who is an expert in analysing witness statements for possible deception. I recorded a 2-hour-long interview in which Peter Hyatt analysed an interview the McCanns gave for Australian television in 2011. Although Peter Hyatt had not watched any of my films, he came to identical conclusions.
What I concluded from just this interview itself is that Madeleine is dead, the death was not intentional, that they have disposed of her remains in a hidden manner of which they feel confident will not be found. The cause of death was likely not intended and may have included both causing her to be very sleepy and a fall. They have feared being accused, their concerns about themselves, and that the time frame that they've given must be questioned. Those are things that I conclude strongly. Now, underneath that is the possibility of sexual abuse being part of this equation is strong.
In this release, my fourth set of films, I will deal with two issues I promised earlier to look at. One is the role of the initial chief suspect in this case, Robert Murat. The other is the issue of how Madeleine died and why it was covered up. I believe I have demonstrated in previous films that Madeleine died earlier in the week, and I believe that the McCanns, with the help from many powerful people and millions of pounds donated by the British public, have covered up her tragic fate. From now on in the film, I am assuming Madeleine died during the 2007 holiday and was not abducted. I will not specifically say each time alleged death or allegedly died. I will speak as though this is true, so that the narrative flows better. But I state now that the death is based on my own belief, which is based on the evidence I have revealed. It is not a statement of legal fact. There is no suggestion at all, by the way, that Robert Murat was involved in Madeleine's death. It is the extraordinary things that happened after her death that I shall be examining in relation to Robert Murat. Murat flew out to Portugal from the UK at 7 a.m. on Tuesday the 1st of May 2007. This is about a day and a half after the time when I believe Madeleine died, and 2.5 days before the McCanns reported Madeleine missing. Murat was born in London in 1973. At the time of Madeleine's reported disappearance, he was just 33 years old. His father, John Murat, was born in Portugal, but he was sent to England to be tutored at the Hillbrow School, an exclusive boarding school in Eastbourne. Later he went to Bradfield College, where he was a contemporary of comedian Tony Hancock. When Murat was less than 1 month old, his parents moved from England to Portugal, initially living near Lagos, where Mr. Murat Sr. pursued property interests. He died when Murat was 12. Murat's aunt and uncle, Sally and Ralph Everleigh, also live close by in Burgao. In my first Madeleine film, I filmed at their property, Salsalitas, which was subject to a long search by the Portuguese police following Madeleine's disappearance. Like his parents, Murat's early life was split between Portugal and England. During this time he became bilingual in Portuguese and English. His early education was at the English language Barlavento School and the International School on the Algarve coast. He was then sent to England to study, finally returning to a secondary school in Lagos until he was 16. Then he went back to England and lived with his maternal grandmother in Sidmouth, Devon for a spell. This unsettled, to and fro way of life in England one moment and in Portugal the next may explain the very disturbing statement I am now about to read from. It was a witness statement taken by the Portuguese police from a family friend of the Murats, a Mr. Carlos Costa. I can't guarantee its accuracy, as his evidence hasn't been tested in court, but I believe we should take it into account in order to shed possible light on Murat's psychology before we look at his involvement. He has known Robert Murat for about 25 years. He got to know him while working at Jacinto and Murat from 1982 to 84. At this time, Robert was 8 years old. Immediately one noticed that Robert had a strange personality, staying away from people and not wanting to engage. He had somewhat of a violent attitude. He remembers an episode where Robert, on the veranda on the first floor of the firm, threw vases from that exterior without checking to see if anyone was underneath him. A neighbour told him that Robert had tried to have sexual relations with her mother's cat. The animal responded by scratching him on various parts of his body. These injuries were seen by the deponent, given that he, Robert, had visited the Castillejo beach in Villa de Bispo on various occasions. On one of these occasions, he saw Robert scratching at excoriations. He was told by L that Robert had killed the cat out of spite. He also states that he witnessed a macabre episode perpetrated by Robert. He saw him once again trying to have relations, this time with the family dog, who ended up being forced into the house, situated in Almedina y Las Velas. He states that when he went to the beach with Robert, he, Robert, would stay away from the rest of the group, about 15 to 20 metres, and not say a word to anyone the whole day. He also adds that a cousin of Robert, of British nationality, whose name he does not know, and who lives in his house, has suffered an assault by Robert. For this reason she left the home. These acts were hidden by Robert's mother, who protected him and who never punished him. At this point, Robert was 16 years old. He would like to add that according to what he knows about Robert, he was not surprised that he was described as a disturbed person and could very easily turn violent. He is also someone with a sadistic and deviant sexual personality, and who is also misanthropic. This is based on contact with him for 15 years. If he did abduct this child, then the witness believes she may be dead. He concludes this from Robert's violent and deviant personality. He adds still that he also was violent with his mother when he was reprimanded and would react by kicking her. He asserts that Robert did receive psychiatric treatment whilst in the UK. So, Mr. Costa describes here a person who was prone to sexual deviance, violence and sadism, and has given specific examples. After Murat left school, he began selling double glazing and then later became a car salesman. He moved to Norfolk, where he again worked for a car sales firm called Inchcape, and then for turkey farmer Bernard Matthews. It appears he also worked occasionally as a Portuguese-English interpreter for the police. This experience was to become very relevant in the events following Madeleine's alleged disappearance, as we shall see. At the age of 28, Murat married Dawn, a woman several years older than himself, who already had one child. Murat and Dawn had a child, Sophia, the following year, who was nearly 5 at the time Madeleine was reported missing. Murat persuaded Dawn to move to Portugal, but a few months later they agreed to live separately, Dawn moving back to Norfolk and Murat staying in Portugal with his mother in her home, the Casa Liliana. Murat would visit his daughter from time to time in England. They then agreed to get divorced. The week that the McCanns went on their ill-fated holiday to Portugal, Murat says he was staying with his sister in Sidmouth. He had another sister in nearby Exeter. His grandmother had died, and Murat said he was engaged in renovating her home in Sidmouth. The events begin on Monday the 30th of April. That was the third day of the McCann's holiday. It is also the very next day after what I said in my last film was the last credible sighting of Madeleine at lunchtime on Sunday the 29th of April. As my previous film showed, it is probable that Madeleine was already dead by the 30th of April. On that Monday, it is likely that someone spoke by phone to Murat from Portugal on the 30th, which prompted him to come over to Praia de Luz as soon as possible. It has never been clear who made such an all-important call to him. He booked a flight late on the night of the 30th to leave Exeter Airport, just hours before the flight took off at 7 a.m. on Tuesday the 1st of May. Looking at the history of Murat's travel to and from Portugal before May 2007, he says he made trips back to England to see his wife and daughter in these months. So if we look at the records obtained by the Portuguese police, we find him taking a trip back to Portugal on the 2nd of January 2007. He stays there for nearly 3 months and then flies back to England on the 20th of March 2007. Ostensibly to refurbish his grandmother's home, or visit his ex-wife and daughter, or maybe both. So he had been back in England for about 6 weeks before someone, we are not sure who, required his urgent presence back in Portugal. The reason it seems sudden or urgent is because there is such little time between him buying the ticket and flying out. If we examine the telephone records from the landline of Robert Murat's mother, Jennifer Murat, these reveal quite intense telephone activity on Monday the 30th of April between her phone and 2 Exeter telephone numbers, one of them being Murat's sister's phone, where Murat appeared to have been staying at the time. One of these phone calls to a UK landline just after 9 a.m. lasted over an hour. Some of these calls were to a UK mobile phone number. Why was Murat's mother speaking to him that day? Or could someone else have made the call? Michaela Walchuk, his fiancée perhaps. Michaela Walchuk's mobile phone records on that Monday morning show that she made several long phone calls instead of her usual short ones. But whatever calls Murat did receive that may have prompted his early morning flight to Portugal, he boarded the 7 a.m. flight to Faro and was there by 9 a.m. And there to meet him was his mother. Murat was first pulled in by the police for questioning on the 14th of May. They questioned him about his movements from arrival at Faro on the 1st of May up to the morning of the 4th of May after Madeleine was reported missing. Remember, it is assumed Madeleine is already dead before he arrives in Portugal. Here is the record from his first interview. I will give a summary of his movements based on his statement. Tuesday the 1st of May. Arrived at 9:30 at the airport in Faro, where he was met by his mother. Stopped at a petrol station at the airport exit that had closed toilets. He didn't eat anything or fill up the car. He then drove to the A22, where he stopped at the first service station on the way. He drank a latte coffee, as did his mother. He ate a meat pie, and his mother had a cheese and ham croissant. Soon after that, they went directly to Casa Liliana in Praia de Luz, where he arrived between 11:30 and noon. Without unpacking his suitcase or entering his home, he went in the VW to see Michaela, his fiancée, at the house in Lagos where she lived with her husband, Luis Antonio, arriving between 12 and 12:30, where he took some gifts for both her and her daughter. Michaela and Luis Antonio were in the process of divorcing. He remained in her house, he thinks, until between 3 and 3:30 p.m, talking with the entire family, including the child's father, Luis Antonio. He then drove himself home, where he arrived at 4 p.m. He does not remember having gone to another place before arriving at his mother's house. Once at home, he does not know if he went out again that day. Wednesday the 2nd of May. He got up at around 9 a.m. and left home between 10 and 10:30 a.m. He went to Lagos in the VW to Michaela's, where he arrived at 10:40. He entered her house and she was alone. He remained there for a short time talking. They left there and went in the VW to the centre of Lagos. He parked in a street and went to the home of Francisco Pagaret, his lawyer, who was not there, but Pagaret's girlfriend was there. Next, he went to meet his future real estate partners in their store called Putos Grados, located in Lagos, whose current line of business is the sale of clothing, owned by Jorge Silva. After the meeting in the store, he went to a cafe with Michaela, Jorge Silva and Jorge's son Jason. Soon after this, they went to another cafe located in Lagos Marina, which was less noisy, where they talked about business. He had a latte to drink, but does not know if the others did. The bill was paid by Michaela in the first cafe, and he has no idea who paid in the second. They remained in the second cafe until between 10 to 2 and 2 p.m. After the marina, they walked back to the VW, and he then had lunch in the Bembom restaurant in Lagos, this time only with Michaela. They arrived just after 2 o'clock. He ate roast meat, and lunch ended between 3:15 and 3:20. They then went to the school to pick up Michaela's 8-year-old daughter, arriving at around 3:25. They then went back to the home of Pagaret, who this time was present. They spoke with Pagaret about Murat's divorce and about building properties while standing next to the VW. He and Michaela then returned to Michaela's house in Lagos with her daughter. He remained in the apartment with Michaela and her daughter for a long time. Her husband Louis arrived by 9 p.m. or shortly after, when they were having dinner of pork or turkey. He left Michaela's home at between 10:30 and 11 p.m. in the VW and went to his mother's house in Praia de Luz, parked the vehicle in front of the house, spoke with his mother who was awake, played cards on his computer and went to sleep between 1 and 1:30 a.m. He remained at the house until the next morning. Thursday the 3rd of May. He woke up between 8 and 9 a.m, took a bath, dressed, drank some tea, then left the house in the VW at 10. He presumes he went to Lagos to see Michaela. He does not know where he parked the VW. He went up to her apartment, rang the bell, Michaela opened the door. Only Michaela was at home. They talked about the website for their real estate project in the lounge and in the kitchen for quite some time. They left the apartment at around noon in the VW, taking the roads towards Portimao. Before Odexer, they went round the access roundabout to the A22. 10 to 15 minutes after leaving the apartment, they came to the petrol pumps of the Galp M24 service station on the A22, where they had lunch. They left the service station and returned to the apartment, where they once again spoke about various things. They collected Michaela's daughter from school in the VW at 3:30 p.m, and the three were then met with Jorge Silva and his son. He does not know where, but believes it was at the Lagos Marina. There they went into a cafe whose name he can't recall. It was next to a play area for children where Michaela's daughter played. They spoke about Ramajan, their new business venture, and the meeting finished late, he thinks between 6 and 7. Everybody left together, went to the VW, which was parked in the car park at the rear of the marina. They gave a ride to Jorge Silva and his son, dropping them off at the bus station next to the CTT in the city, arriving between 7:15 and 7:30. He parked the VW in front of the house and does not recall if his mother was at home when he arrived, but he thinks so, because it was late for her to walk the dogs, as she usually leaves at 5 and returns at 7. After entering the house, he may have drunk tea and watched television. He may also have read a newspaper. He talked with his mother about Ramajan, ate a ham and cheese sandwich, sitting in the kitchen with his mother, until between 10 and 11 p.m. Contrary to what he said originally, he was not with Michaela when she went to a Jehovah's Witness meeting between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. This is why he didn't phone her, because she turns her phone off in the meetings. He doesn't know if he called her after 10 p.m, but accepts that is a possibility. He was at home with his mother when at 10:30 p.m. or a little later, he heard the siren of an ambulance or police. He commented on that to his mother. However, he did not leave the house to investigate. He did not leave again until the next morning, having gone to bed around midnight. Friday the 4th of May. woke at around 9 a.m, took a bath, went to the kitchen where his mother told him that something terrible had happened. A child had disappeared in Praia de Luz, according to Sky News. As soon as he heard this, he and his mother went to look in the garden, which is enclosed with a high wall and fence. They checked to see if the child had managed to enter. They also searched the greenhouse. Then they saw an English passerby. He does not know who the passerby was. The passerby told him that a child had disappeared. Accompanied by that person, he went to the place of the disappearance and was introduced to the parents of Madeleine McCann because he spoke the two languages, Portuguese and English. He started a conversation with the family of the child, offering to help. Together with an officer of the GNR, the local police, and an employee of the resort using several keys, he entered several apartments, opened with the keys supplied by the employees or by the tenants in order to try and locate the child. Some of the apartments were closed and there were no keys for them. These sites were flagged by the GNR man. At this time he met John Hill, the manager of the complex, who supplied them with more keys to the apartments. Now I'm going to come back in a moment to what Murat did after Madeleine was reported missing. But first I need to look at a second series of statements that Murat made to the Portuguese police some 2 months later. He was thoroughly re-questioned on the 10th and 11th of July. By then, the Portuguese police had gathered third-party information about Murat. Notably, they had interrogated his mobile phone records, and they showed that Murat had been lying to them in his initial statements on the 14th of May. Here is his full statement. It is very different from his first one. Altogether, there are around 20 changes of story, some more important than others. Let's just explain some of the more important ones. He failed to mention that on Wednesday the 2nd of May, he met Sergei Malinka at the Batista supermarket near his mother's house at about 10 a.m. That may be significant, as he also failed to remember ringing Sergei Malinka just before midnight on the night Madeleine was reported missing. The evidence is quite clear that Murat and Malinka were long-time associates in some business or other, so it seems odd that Murat would not admit to having had contact with him. Later that morning, he originally said he had not met his lawyer Francisco Pagaret, but in his second statement admitted that he had met him. He says that in the afternoon, on either the 2nd or the 3rd, he visited 2 houses in Lagos with Michaela, each visit lasting about 20 to 30 minutes. Why did he not mention visiting these 2 houses when first interviewed? He does not name the owner, nor does he say why he visited these 2 houses. On the 2nd of May in the evening, he originally said that he and Michaela were at Michaela's home with Michaela's husband Louis, but in his second statement he says her husband wasn't there. On Thursday the 3rd of May, he said he spent the morning after about 10:30 a.m. with Michaela. In his later statement, however, he admitted that he had had a business appointment at a tourist complex called Montinos de Ouro in Espiche at 9:30 a.m, where he says he met the father-in-law, a builder, of the lady owner of the complex. This was a major omission. Moreover, Murat doesn't give the lady owner's name, saying he can't remember it, and he again doesn't say what the purpose of this meeting was. On the afternoon that day, Murat originally said he had spent the afternoon with Michaela at her apartment. He now said that he had been with Jorge Silva, his son, and Michaela at the Palmeiras Golf Club. That was another major omission. Why did he not reveal that the first time? And why did they drive several miles from Espiche to the Palmeiras Golf Club on the Thursday afternoon, when they could have carried on talking in the cafe in Lagos or Praia de Luz? Was something very secret being discussed? I visited the golf club in 2014 when I was researching my first Madeleine film. Just pulled up at the Palmeiras Golf Club, which is a few miles east of Lagos, maybe 7 or 8 miles east of Praia de Luz. The movements of Jerry McCann on that Thursday afternoon are shrouded in mystery by a series of inexplicable contradictions. Is it possible that Murat met with him that afternoon at the Palmeiras Golf Club, a place Jerry might well have known, as he had previously been on golfing holidays on the Algarve coast? On that afternoon, in his first statement, Murat said that he and Michaela collected her daughter from school after 3 p.m. and then spent most of the next 4 hours talking to Michaela and her daughter, together with Jorge Silva and his son, up to about 7 p.m. But in his more recent statement, he now says he went straight from school to Michaela's home and did not meet Jorge Silva and his son. Murat's phone records showed that he phoned his friend Sergei Malinka at 11:39 p.m. on the 3rd of May, i.e. the night Madeleine was reported missing. They also showed that he phoned Michaela 1 minute earlier. But he did not mention either of these phone calls in his first statement. The day after, on Friday morning, the 4th of May, he originally claimed to have woken up at about 9 a.m. and then had a bath. But when he was shown that he had made a phone call to Michaela at 8:27 a.m. that morning, he now admitted that he must have phoned her then, though he couldn't remember it, and must have woken up earlier. If we go back to the top of Murat's second statement, we find the excuses he makes for having got so many things wrong. He says he was tired, confused, and even rattled by the police interview. It seems likely to me that he deliberately withheld information, which was only forced out of him because his mobile phone had pinged in a number of places he had not previously mentioned. In his statements, he mentions his proposed estate agency business Romijan and developing a website for it. The RO was for Robert and the MI was for Michaela. As it transpired, no such business was ever established. According to his statements, he spent a lot of time discussing this. Murat would have us believe that he discussed the Romijan business on the Wednesday morning and later that morning and again on Wednesday afternoon. The Thursday afternoon and evening was apparently another long meeting in a cafe where Romijan was discussed, and again with Jorge Silva present, except that when re-questioned, Murat later said that no such meeting took place that day. So did it really take 4 separate meetings in different places to discuss a future business? Or were he and the Silvas discussing other matters? Then there are the unexplained meetings. There were either 1 or 2 meetings with his lawyer Francisco Pagaret, but we are not told what they are about. Caught out by the police, Murat admitted attending a meeting in Espiche on the Thursday morning. He doesn't mention the subject matter of the meeting, nor does he give the name of the lady tourist complex owner or the father-in-law builder. Nothing is checkable. Then, caught out by police a second time, he has to admit that on Thursday afternoon he was at the Palmeiras Golf Club, miles away from Michaela's home in Lagos and from his home in Praia de Luz, something he forgot to mention when first questioned. Why did he go there? Who else was there? Furthermore, it was only during Murat's second interview that he casually mentions visiting 2 houses, either on the Wednesday or Thursday, in the company of Michaela and the unnamed house owner. Once again, Murat doesn't tell us what the purpose of those visits were. To sum up then, Murat gave a false account of his movements from the 1st to the 4th of May when first questioned. His second statement is very different. He gives us more detail, but not much. He meets people whose names he doesn't tell us, nor why he met them. If he was evasive or lied the first time police talked to him, could he have done the same in the second interview? On the morning of Friday the 4th of May, Robert Murat became an official interpreter for the Portuguese police. He was bilingual in English and Portuguese. How did he become a key translator? There are 2 separate versions of how this came about. Version 1 is that an Englishman from Stevenage, Stephen Carpenter, as we saw earlier in Murat's first statement, just happened to be strolling past his mother's villa on the Friday morning following Madeleine being reported missing. Murat and Carpenter agree that this was between 9 and 10 a.m. Now, we just saw that Murat had to change part of that story because his mobile phone records revealed that he had made a phone call to his fiancée Michaela that morning at 8:27 a.m. In his first statement, talking about the night Madeleine was reported missing, it states, 10:30 p.m. or a little later, he heard a siren of an ambulance or police. He commented on that with his mother, however, did not leave the house to investigate. Let us also recall that he forgot when giving his first statement that he had called his friend Sergei Malinka at 11:39 p.m. the night Madeleine was reported missing. and made another call a minute earlier to his fiancée Michaela. If Murat is to be believed, he knew nothing that night about a child being missing, despite having heard ambulance and police sirens. At the time he rang Sergei and Michaela, people were running about the village shouting, "Maddie, Maddie." And let's not forget, his mother's house was just yards from the McCann's apartment. Let's also remind ourselves that Murat was very well known and connected in Praia de Luz. His mother had lived there for decades. The police found dozens of phone numbers on his mobile. Here is a list of them. He was one of the most known local people. His mother was on the local residence committee. He was a local businessman. Murat's claim to have known nothing about Madeleine's disappearance on that night does not seem remotely credible. So was Murat trying to distance himself from having known anything about Madeleine's disappearance until the Friday morning? Murat says that after learning from Carpenter that Madeleine was about the same age as his own daughter, he eagerly volunteered the information that he was bilingual and offered to act as a translator. Pull the other one. So they went up to the Ocean Club where, Murat says, he was introduced to Jerry and Kate McCann and offered his help as a translator. But is that the real story? To answer this, I'm going to read from an article by a well-briefed independent Portuguese journalist, Paulo Reis. Reis clearly had access to Portuguese police sources who were leaking him information from the Madeleine McCann investigation. In early 2008, he wrote this about Bill Henderson, the British ambassador to Portugal. Staff from Bill Henderson's office suggested the name of Robert Murat as a reliable translator who could be used in the police inquiry in the days following Madeleine McCann's disappearance. Murat was already known among diplomatic staff as he had letters of recommendation from Norfolk Police. He had been working in Norfolk for Bernard Matthews, one of the largest poultry farm companies in the UK, which employs hundreds of Portuguese workers. The fact that Robert Murat has acted before as a translator for Norfolk Police and the recommendation issued by Bill Henderson's office led police to accept the suggestion, according to PJ, Portuguese police sources. After Murat was named a formal suspect, the police went through all translations he had done, checking their accuracy, but no problem was found according to the same sources. Bill Henderson retired from his diplomatic post and went back to the UK in August. Now, bearing in mind the conclusion I made in my last film, that Madeleine may have died as early as Sunday the 29th of April, if that is correct, those who plotted to pass off Madeleine's sudden death as an abduction would have had 4 days to put in hand all the specific plans necessary to make the abduction story as convincing as possible. In order to do that, how convenient would it be to have an insider like Robert Murat in place at just the right time to act as one of the key translators for the police? Was Robert Murat made ready to be in just the right place at the right time to act as a translator when the Portuguese police needed to speak to Jerry and Kate McCann and the rest of their Tapa 7 friends about what had happened to Madeleine? What is very clear from Paulo Reis's report is that the British ambassador and his staff already knew Robert Murat. They had a recommendation apparently from Norfolk Police. That seems curious, as I can find no reference to Robert Murat being an accredited interpreter. Could it be that Robert Murat was a known asset to British intelligence, and his ability to act as an interpreter was one of a number of reasons why someone on Monday the 30th of April may have summoned him to get over to Portugal without delay? If he were to be an interpreter right from the start, he would be in prime position to let key people know what was going on in those all-important first few days of the investigation, sometimes known as the golden period, in which vital clues may be gained or lost. And the Portuguese police records show that Murat was the interpreter for all these English-speaking witnesses. I'm now going to show how Murat strayed well beyond his role as an interpreter by quoting from a report by one of Gonçalo Amaral's key senior staff, Inspector Veranda. He was so concerned about Murat's conduct as an interpreter that on the 11th of May, after Murat had been translating for a week, He filed a complaint about him to Amaral, who was leading the investigation. Veranda made these 8 key accusations against him. He kept on asking insistently about the identity of possible suspects. He kept on asking about the strategy of the investigation. He kept on asking about what work was going on to be done in the coming days. He kept on trying to steal a look at confidential documents. He had detailed knowledge of the Ocean Club garden. He had detailed knowledge of what the McCanns and their friends had been doing that week in Praia de Luz. He actively tried to influence the conduct of the investigation. He persistently suggested that foreigners were responsible for abducting Madeleine. At point 5, Inspector Veranda states that Murat had detailed knowledge of the Ocean Club garden. But as we saw earlier, when Murat gave his first untrue statement to the police, he told the Portuguese police he did not know the interior of the Ocean Club, only entering the resort after the disappearance. I do not believe that Murat had never in his life entered the Ocean Club until after Madeleine had been reported missing. I also want to highlight this part of Murat's first statement. He started a conversation with the family of the child, offering to help. Together with an officer of the GNR and an employee of the resort with several keys, entered several apartments, opened with the keys or by the tenants in order to locate the child. Some of the apartments were closed and there were no keys. These sites were flagged by the GNR man. At that time he met John Hill, manager of Mark Warner, who supplied them with more keys to the other apartments. So, was Robert Murat already acquainted with the McCanns? I will return to that subject in a moment. We see here that he was able to talk to the McCanns on the morning after Madeleine had been reported missing. But just as interesting is why Murat was invited by Mark Warner top brass and Ocean Club manager John Hill to accompany him and a GNR police officer as he went round the Ocean Club opening up various apartments. And after that, the GNR officer and Murat were given keys to other apartments. I can understand a GNR officer being given keys, but I cannot see any valid reason as to why Murat should accompany him. It looks to me as though Murat was rapidly, on the very first morning following Madeleine's disappearance, being given great privileges, both searching the apartments and being made the chief interpreter. Not surprisingly, after receiving Inspector Veranda's report, Gonçalo Amaral soon removed him from his interpreting duties. But how much valuable information could Murat have passed on to others from the very heart of the investigation? Let me turn now to an astonishing sequence of events which seemed designed to put Robert Murat in the frame as the lead suspect for having allegedly abducted Madeleine McCann. As I have mentioned, due to the evidence in my previous film, I believe Madeleine was already dead before Murat got to Portugal, so I am making no suggestion that Murat was involved in Madeleine's death. The first person I've been able to determine to publicly point the finger at Murat was a young journalist called Laurie Campbell, who was working for the Daily Mirror and the Independent at the time. Laurie Campbell had previously worked very closely with Clarence Mitchell, the McCann's PR representative, in covering the Soham murders case. He was then working for the BBC as a crime correspondent. It's also interesting that Leicestershire Police referred Laurie Campbell not to the Portuguese police, but to the British Embassy, who, remember, helped secure the appointment of Murat as the main interpreter. Portuguese investigative journalist Paulo Reis assessed the involvement of Laurie Campbell and made these observations. On the 6th of May 2007, a female CID officer in the Leicestershire Constabulary faxed the Portugal incident room, stating that Laurie Campbell, a reporter for the Sunday Mirror, had been in contact. Laurie has been speaking to an interpreter who has been helping the Portuguese authorities with the investigation into Madeleine's disappearance. He has only given his name as Rob and has not given any background information about himself. Laurie has become suspicious of Rob as he has given conflicting accounts of various people, and he became very concerned when he noticed his photo being taken by the Mirror's photographer. Rob stated to Laurie that he was going through a messy divorce in the UK at the moment, and that he had a 3-year-old daughter just like Madeleine, from whom he is separated. He made a big show of telephoning his daughter in front of reporters, and Laurie felt he was being too loud and making a big thing of it. The things that Rob said to Laurie have raised her concerns about him. Could you please call Laurie, who is still in Portugal, to establish further details to identify Rob in order to eliminate him from your inquiries? The Leicestershire police were impressively quick in forwarding Miss Campbell's information to the PJ, in stark contrast to the way they handled some other matters, such as statements made by the Gaspers about David Payne talking to Jerry McCann about asking him whether Madeleine would perform a paedophilic act. Murat then came under suspicion and the PJ intercepted his telephone, picking up some interesting chats with Martin Brunt of Sky News and a conversation with Phil, a British police officer, whom Murat asked about the ways mobile phone signals could be traced to specific locations. Mr. Murat's interest seemed to be whether such tracking would prove he was at home during the critical hours of Thursday the 3rd of May 2007. It is my opinion that Laurie Campbell is probably a British Security Services asset, and that once Murat had performed his role of whatever he did between the 1st and 4th of May, they decided, with the help of Campbell and others, to set him up as yet another patsy abductor to confuse the investigation. As the British and Portuguese police began investigating Murat, the media went to town on him, filling their front pages with their suspicions about him and generally suggesting that he was the man responsible for abducting Madeleine. Murat's backstory featured heavily in the various media accounts. Less than a year later, these newspapers had to pay him £600,000 in libel damages plus his costs. Gonçalo Amaral wrote about this in his book. He explains how on the second day after Madeleine was reported missing, Sunday the 5th of May, a Glenn Power was appointed as the British police official liaison officer attached to the British Embassy. Quite why it was necessary for any British police to get involved so quickly has never been explained. He must have been dispatched to Portugal as soon as news broke of Madeleine's disappearance. 2 days later, says Amaral, more English police officers arrived. One of them was a high-ranking officer from Leicestershire Police, Detective Chief Superintendent Bob Small, with 2 colleagues from Leicestershire. Amaral was bemused by this influx of the British police force. In his book he writes, "We insist on knowing what our English counterparts have come to Portugal to do. I assign one of my investigators to follow the English superintendent like a shadow and to keep me informed about his action. They weren't helping the Portuguese, they were actively hindering them." Amaral goes on, "Little by little, the number of English police officers grows exponentially." Again, we have to ask, as Amaral did, what were they really there for? Were they working for the British Security Services? There was a very strange parallel development in Leicestershire. It has emerged that on Tuesday the 8th of May, 5 days after Madeleine's reported disappearance, a high-powered committee consisting of top people from many government departments and Secret Service agencies was set up under the chairmanship of the then Chief Constable of Leicestershire Police, Matt Baggett. He later told the Leveson inquiry, on the 8th of May 2007, Leicestershire Constabulary was asked to coordinate the UK response to assist the Portuguese inquiry on behalf of the UK Government and Association of Chief Police Officers. A coordination group was set up on behalf of law enforcement agencies and government departments to coordinate the media interaction and ensure that a consistent stance was taken. Not to look for Madeleine then, but to coordinate the media interaction. All those law enforcement agencies and government departments tightly coordinated to control what comes out in the media. Something very big must have been at stake. Within a week, there were so many British police officers crowding in on the Portuguese police that Amaral was forced to place at their disposal a room next to our crisis unit. Describing this army of British staff, Amaral said, "Specialists from various police services, including Scotland Yard, special surveillance teams, as well as information and telecommunications technicians, all turning up with their laptops and various high-tech equipment. Many others, notably criminal profilers, British analysts, trace timelines and patterns of connections based on the witness statements gathered. They produce giant summary boards that cover the walls of the offices. They attend all our meetings and collaborate in decision-making. We now know that MI5 was interested in the case and sent representatives to Portugal. Special Branch became involved. Jim Gamble, then the head of the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre, sent some of his staff. Gamble very soon called for anyone who had holidayed in Praia de Luz to send him their holiday photos. And ever since, Gamble, though no longer head of CEOP, has stood shoulder to shoulder with the McCanns at every twist and turn, and even now campaigns for them on Twitter. Amaral in his book tells us, "It was the work of these British criminal profilers who helped to put into the minds of the Portuguese police investigators that Robert Murat might be the likely abductor. Members of the British agency CEOP take a close interest in Murat and work to develop his psychological profile." Amaral had been forced to turn his attention to Murat by the huge attention being paid to him by the world's media and by the disturbing report he had received from Inspector Veranda. Amaral explains, "They have heard about the statement from one of his childhood friends, put on the file by the police department. According to him, Murat had an affirmed penchant for bestiality. Moreover, he allegedly attempted to rape his 16-year-old cousin. This individual describes Murat as someone who was violent, with behavioural problems, a sexual pervert, sadist and misanthropist. We are somewhat sceptical. All the same, according to the English profilers, there is a 90% chance that he is the guilty party." The event that clinched Amaral's decision to make Murat a formal suspect was the decision of the McCann's close friend Jane Tanner to identify Murat as the man she said she had seen carrying a child at around 9:15 p.m. on the night Madeleine was reported missing. "I dealt with this in my second Madeleine film, The Phantoms." Amaral goes on, "Murat's behaviour starts to seriously intrigue me. He often makes references to similar cases that happened in the United Kingdom and which he seems to know in detail. He displays suspicious curiosity and seeks to know more. He offers to help us identify suspects. He knows the workings of the Ocean Club and the habits of the holiday makers very well. He even tried to secretly access the investigation files. It is also known that he visits websites of a pornographic nature. His mother has set up a desk near the tapas restaurant in order to gather and give out information about Madeleine. We don't know if this woman's actions are philanthropic in nature or if she is hoping to keep well informed of all the information circling about the case. Members of the British agency CEOP take a close interest in Murat and work to develop his psychological profile. Before the search, we want to assure ourselves that Jane Tanner recognises him as the individual she saw on the night of the disappearance. She is sitting inside an unmarked car whose tinted windows allow her to see out without being spotted. The vehicle is parked at the exact spot where she says on the night of the 3rd of May, Robert Murat, anonymous amongst plainclothes police officers, goes up the road in the same way, says Tanner, as the alleged abductor. Jane Tanner is adamant. It certainly is Robert Murat that she saw that night. She definitely recognises his way of walking. Then in his book, Amaral writes, "But does he resemble the description she painted previously?" No, he doesn't. To understand why Jane Tanner made this identification of Murat, I will reveal what we now know happened just before Jane Tanner made this remarkable identification. It turns out that immediately prior to identifying Murat, she spent time with a very senior Leicestershire police officer, Detective Chief Superintendent Bob Small. But she also admits that she talked to two men from the government-backed firm Control Risks Group, Kenneth Farrow and Michael Keenan. This is how Wikipedia describes the firm. Control Risks is a global risk and strategic consulting firm specialising in political, security and integrity risk. Operating from 36 offices, the company's primary service include anti-corruption audits, consultancy and training, e-discovery, political risk analysis and a broad range of security and crisis management support. In September 2007, David Brown for The Times wrote, "Kate and Jerry McCann turned to the company which employs former members of the intelligence services and special forces after becoming concerned that officers in the Algarve assumed their daughter was dead. A source close to the couple's legal team confirmed that Control Risks Group had been working with the family since May, but refused to discuss how the company was being paid." The idea that Control Risks Group was searching for Madeleine is ridiculous. they had zero experience in looking for missing children. All the indications are that the government was funding them and that they were an integral part of the government's attempt to cover up what really happened to Madeleine. And as Jane Tanner herself confessed, control risks were at the very heart of the attempt to frame Murat as the abductor. It seems highly probable that control risks and Bob Small were instrumental in manipulating Jane Tanner to positively identify Robert Murat as the man she said she saw carrying a child. This identification was the catalyst which made Robert Murat into an official suspect. And so it was that the police searched Murat's home on the 14th of May and took him in for questioning. It was headline news across the world. I suggest by now it is becoming clear that there was a coordinated plot to frame Robert Murat, have him arrested and made a suspect. If that is in doubt, what followed surely confirmed it. During the 2 days that followed Murat being made a suspect, no fewer than 3 members of the Tapas 7 suddenly remembered that they had seen Robert Murat hanging around near the McCann's apartment talking to some of the group soon after Madeleine was reported missing. According to Rachel Oldfield, one of the Tapas 7, she said she saw Murat on a Sky News report and immediately claimed to Jane Tanner that she had seen Murat on the night of the 3rd of May near the Ocean Club. Fiona Payne, another Tapas 7 friend of the McCanns, then said the same. And then Dr. Russell O'Brien said he also had actually met Murat on the night of the 3rd of May. He later changed that, however, and claimed he'd met Murat the following morning, and actually put Murat's phone number into his mobile list of contacts. 2 days after Murat was made a suspect, Rachel Oldfield, Fiona Payne and Dr. Russell O'Brien all made statements to the police which put Murat close to the scene of the alleged abduction on the night in question. This would have confirmed to Amaral and his team that they were on the right track. But Gunchala Amaral was suspicious about their statements, so decided to arrange for the 3 Tapas 7 members to meet with Robert Murat in a tiny room kneecap to kneecap in the Portimao police station on the 11th of July. He wrote, "A confrontation is organised between the witnesses. Nothing new comes out of it. The former persist in stating that the suspect was definitely in the area on the night of the disappearance. Murat denies the whole thing and even accuses them of lying. Each side stands its ground." In the coming months, 5 other people also remembered having seen Murat near the McCann's apartment that night. That is according to newspaper reports probably sourced from the McCann's PR spokesman Clarence Mitchell. The Daily Mail named the 5 as including holidaymaker Jane Jensen, an unnamed British barrister, and 2 people that had contacted the McCann's investigation hotline. But then, in 2008, not long after Amaral was removed from the investigation, several of the 8 people who said they remembered seeing Murat suddenly admitted they might have been confused with another person. Either David Payne or Angus Symington, one of the owners of the Ocean Club, who was said to resemble Murat. The Daily Mail said, "Doubt was cast on the evidence of several key witnesses in the Madeleine McCann disappearance last night. Those who said they saw suspect Robert Murat outside the family's holiday apartment on the night she vanished may have named the wrong man, it was revealed. Detectives believe the witnesses who said they saw the British expat could have confused him with a friend of Kate and Jerry McCann, David Payne, who was out searching for the missing 3-year-old. A series of witnesses had given statements claiming to have seen him around the Ocean Club apartment complex in the hours after Mrs. McCann, 39, raised the alarm. They included 3 friends of the McCanns, Russell O'Brien, Fiona Payne and Rachel Oldfield. It looks to me as though it was convenient and helpful to the McCanns to have the attention focused on Murat as a suspect. But several months later, it seems to have been convenient to drop Murat as a suspect. This may have occurred because of a crucial meeting held on the 13th of November 2007, which I'll come to in a moment. I should just add that in April 2008, the Tapas 3, Rachel Oldfield, Fiona Payne and Russell O'Brien, were re-questioned at Enderby, Leicestershire Police Headquarters by Leicestershire Police on the instructions of the Portuguese police. All were re-questioned in some depth about their claims of speaking with Robert Murat on the evening of the 3rd of May. Rachel Oldfield and Fiona Payne stuck to their story, but Russell O'Brien admitted that he had only seen Murat on the morning after and not the night before. There's one more episode that we need to look at, which I mentioned briefly in my first Madeleine film, and that's the moment Jerry McCann was asked by an interviewer, "Did you already know Robert Murat?"
Jerry McCann negou conhecê-lo.
But did you know Robert Murat?
I'm not going to comment on that.
Os avanços no processo podem ditar novos interrogatórios ao casal McCann, que deve voltar a Portimão no final desta semana.
In my opinion, it is a real possibility that Jerry McCann had previously met Murat, and that would be hugely significant. Many news organisations from many countries covered the Madeleine McCann case. Sky News gave the case intensive coverage. Their man in Pride of Us was their chief crime correspondent, Martin Brunt. I'm going to take a brief look now at the two phone calls Brunt made to Robert Murat. The first, secretly recorded by the Portuguese police and published by them in August 2008, took place on the 15th of May, the day after Murat had been made a suspect. His mother, Jennifer Murat, picked up the call. It went like this. Hello, residents of Jenny Murat. Hello, Martin Brunt speaking. Hi, dear. Hi, is everything all right? Yes, Robert is a little depressed now. I'm sure he is. It wasn't very nice of Sky News to refer to him as our Guido, don't you think? I didn't see that. I was up at our house. What are they saying in regard to that? Robert Murat has been made an arguido in the case of Madeleine McCann. What does the term arguido mean in Portuguese? What does the term arguido mean, Robert? Suspect. Suspect. Okay, well, I'm not completely familiar with the legal Portuguese terms. I think that someone said that the police said they were treating Robert as an arguido. Robert, as an arguido? What I mean is, what is that? I'm going to pass you to Robert. Don't hang up, Martin. Okay, thanks. Hello, Martin. Hello, Robert. Your number didn't show up. That's why I didn't know who it was. Oh, I didn't send you my number. That's okay. Well, I will see if I manage not to lose this one, if I can find the tool. Okay, we will try. I have not seen it yet, but we will try to explain. The police say, or was it the local journalists who say, you should be treated as an arguido, that he is a suspect, basically. Yes, well, even so, given the tone of the interrogation, and the fact of being free, which says a lot about the interest in you, eh? That is the same as finishing me off. It was not me. I didn't do anything. And now I am literally... Okay, I know, I think. It's always on when I turn the TV on. And even now. Yes, well, it would be better to turn it off. Really, to have been quiet was the best thing I could have done. Yes, but when I turn the television on, I think, they are going to finish me completely. They are finishing me off. Okay, I'm going to tell you that in order to have an idea. I'll tell you what we're going to do. Did you talk to the lawyer? Two things. We talked to the Sky lawyer, right, who was of the opinion that according to what you signed, you reported your work as being that of a translator. Certainly, as far as the thing is that it was, it probably is. Oh, go on, continue. We talked to a Sky lawyer. But the problem with the Sky lawyer is that he is English. Yes, no. He is our lawyer. And you can see, he said what it seemed to be to him. According to his understanding. According to his understanding, exactly. And now we are reluctant to talk to the lawyer who contacted you. That's right, okay? We do not know him, okay? And you do not know him. Well, you don't? Exactly, that's right. I do not know him, mate. And we do not know where he came from, or what his credibility is. Yes, and they told us that the police were going to play games with false leads, and that was why, and who knows whether he is who he says he is. That's right, okay. And he could be trying to test you out, or hoping that we pass him some information. Certainly. We know that you suspect your calls are being listened to because of this. Right. Because of this reason we are very reluctant, because we do not know him, and you do not know him. But however, the best option you have to come clean with this would probably be to go with a lawyer from Lisbon. Somebody with
someone from up there, not from the Algarve. It would have to be someone from Lisbon. Is that okay? That's okay. I will try and arrange for someone from there. But, okay. But our position in relation to all this, for the moment, as I have explained previously, is that we consider ourselves to be very important, and I think it was your opinion initially to do something finally that would manage to be on your side. Yes, and that would not lead to my being detained immediately. Of course, and you know many of the things that you told me were not attributed to me. I understand, and I don't want to enter into all those details, and we did not do anything since I left you. No. I'm sure you understand. Yes. And if there is anything that better clarifies that you think you could say, that could also be used in the future, of course. You know, you could quote Sky sources and others. Yes, that would be perfect. That would be just perfect. But I think it is important that you should have the media there, and if we could appear briefly and make statements in these terms. I was questioned, it was a vague questioning, I was not asked direct questions about Madeleine, and afterwards you explained to me how you felt that they made you a scapegoat, that you have nothing to hide even if your computer is analysed, and at the end of the day you will be absolved, and they will find the true abductor or kidnapper. You could. Let's first look at this with a Portuguese lawyer. We will, won't we? Yes, no. Are you going to do this? I will do my best to arrange for one now. Yes. But independently of what the lawyer thinks, I think that this is the clearest option. But we will have to try to find someone who... Yes, I think this is the simplest. Can you confirm this? I am here having a family discussion to see what they think. Ah, yes, of course I will. But I'm talking about making very clear statements. Yes, okay. That they do not enter into many details, but into the way you can get your message across. Get it across, okay. That you give your version of events, given that the only version of events is vague, and yes, and that the two local journalists and everyone are against you, and that there is nobody, with the exception of my interview with Sally, yes, there has nobody who has spoken in favour of Robert Murat because of this. In fact, of the many interviews given, I have heard that there were some positive ones, people contradicting each other. Yes, they arrived and said, no, they have been very positive about this. Of course, people from the area, people from here, exactly. Who know what happened? Many people from the area said very positive things about this, about me, which is useful. Of course. Well, I will see what I can find and get back in touch with you. Okay, bye. And if we agree on this, yes, and if we could agree to appear for 15 minutes? I never have any problem with making a statement. Okay. I have no problem with that, whilst I have the legal cover to do so, because I don't want to end up in prison. That would be the last thing we want. Firstly, for something I did not do, and secondly, for something that would break their contract rules. I understand that, and I understand the sensitive nature of everything that we have been working with since we arrived here. So, okay, can I phone you again in half an hour? Goodbye. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
So in this phone call, we have evidence that the Murats and Martin Brunt are on familiar terms. Murat calls Brunt mate. Also, we note that Brunt has a house in Praia de Luz, something he has confirmed elsewhere. Evidently, Brunt and Murat had already been talking before his arrest, for example, about the help Brunt was offering from Sky News' legal department. But most significant is where Murat says, "I don't want to go to prison," and gives two reasons. One, he never did it, but also for something that would break their contract rules. Immediately, Brunt realises that Murat has touched on a very sensitive subject and replies, using very guarded language, "I understand the sensitive nature of everything that we have been working with since we arrived here." Murat refers to a contract. What sort of contract is that? Who is the contract with? What are its terms? Murat apparently thinks he might be breaking some contract rules by being interviewed by Martin Brunt. Brunt refers to the sensitive nature of the issue about the contract. He then refers to everything that we've been working with since we arrived here. So what exactly is everything we have been working with? And for how long have they been working with this thing? Well, Brunt says, since we arrived here. When did Sky News and Brunt arrive in Praia de Luz? Well, Sky News was there the very first day Madeleine was reported missing, the 4th of May. What were they discussing? I've covered Murat in detail because I suggest he is a key part of the whole story, although it's clear he was in England when I suggest Madeleine actually died. I suggest from all of the evidence we've looked at so far, Murat was called over to Portugal on behalf of government security services to help plan the abduction hoax that took place at around 10 p.m. on the 3rd of May. I suggest he was already known to security services. I suggest in some capacity he already knew Jerry McCann. In my opinion, his roles probably included, firstly, finding a property with a freezer where Madeleine's body could be conveniently stored and assisting in taking it there. Secondly, volunteering to act as an interpreter. And thirdly, whilst an interpreter, finding out all he could and also suggesting bogus lines of inquiry. It's clear to me he was then framed, but was he willingly framed? On balance, I think this is very possible. One of the reasons I suggest this is that he agreed to be interviewed by the Portuguese police without exercising his right to have a solicitor present to advise him. Yet he comprehensively lied during this first interview. I think he must have known or had good reason to believe that he would be protected. I suggest he was a known security services asset, probably to MI5, and deliberately participated in a complex plot to create an abduction scenario. It follows from that, if the security services were involved in this cover-up, as I demonstrated they were in my first Madeleine film, then in some way, which I will come to in a moment, the reason for their involvement must have been to hide some particularly illegal and or immoral activity that would threaten the UK government if its existence became known. Before leaving the subject of Robert Murat, I want to look at a highly unusual meeting that took place on the 13th of November 2007 at the Villa Salsalitas, owned by Robert Murat's aunt and uncle, Ralph and Sally Everleigh. Present at this meeting were 5 people from what I call the Murat camp, and 2 from the McCann camp. Let's remember at this time the McCanns had been made formal suspects over 2 months previously. There were now 3 suspects, Robert Murat, Jerry McCann and Kate McCann. Let's also recall that exactly 6 weeks before this meeting, Gonçalo Amaral had been removed from the investigation due to diplomatic pressure from the UK government and apparently replaced by a puppet, Paolo Rebello, whose job appeared to be to quietly close down the investigation. So who was at this meeting? In the Murat camp, Robert Murat, Ralph Everleigh, Murat's uncle, Sally Everleigh, Murat's aunt, Jennifer Murat, Murat's mother, and Francisco Pagaret, Murat's lawyer. In the McCann camp, Brian Kennedy, the Cheshire businessman worth around £250 million, one of Britain's richest people, who directed the Find Madeleine investigation and appointed all the dodgy investigation agencies that I covered in my first Madeleine film. And Edward Smethurst, senior Freemason and past Grand Master of the East Lancashire Masonic Province, the man who has acted as the McCanns' coordinating solicitor throughout, and who has been a director of the Find Madeleine Fund since 2009. Smethurst is also alleged to have holidayed every year in Praia de Luz since 1999. Is that just a coincidence? On both sides then, big guns were employed. The meeting was intended to be secret. But when news of it was leaked to the Portuguese press 2 weeks later, Brian Kennedy said the purpose of the meeting was for him to offer Murat a job looking for Madeleine. I believe that was a lie. So what was this meeting really about? 4 members of the Tapas 7 had effectively accused Murat of being involved. Jane Tanner had even said he was the actual abductor. The first thing that stands out is the McCann team must have known that Murat was not the abductor. Otherwise, why send Kennedy and Smethurst to meet him? I suggest this was a planning meeting between the 2 camps. Something had gone wrong when Madeleine unexpectedly died around the 2nd day of the McCann's holiday. Murat, I suggest, had been actively involved in the subsequent cover-up. I keep in mind the possibility that Murat was not a willing patsy. But whether he was or not, I suggest that the purpose of this meeting was to strike some sort of deal. That is perhaps why top lawyers were involved on both sides. The events that followed soon after this meeting are very interesting. Just 4 days later, the Tapper 7 and an array of lawyers and PR agents, including of course Clarence Mitchell, met for a day-long get-together at the Rothley Court Hotel, just down the road from the McCann's house. When news of that meeting leaked out, Clarence Mitchell said it was just a friendly reunion. Anything that comes out of Mitchell's mouth, in my opinion, must immediately be assumed to be a lie unless evidence can be found which shows it to be true. Then weeks later, several people changed their stories about Murat, saying they'd probably mixed him up with someone else. Just weeks after that, Murat started libel proceedings in the High Court and was very shortly handed over £600,000 in an out-of-court settlement, which was rapidly agreed to by several print and TV media. A few weeks after Murat netted £600,000, the McCanns achieved another £550,000 in another out-of-court settlement. Interviewed days after this huge payout, Murat appeared to display no trace of anger at people like Jane Tanner and the other friends of the McCanns who had previously accused him of being the abductor. This strange interview was analysed by the criminologist who runs the popular Eyes for Lies website. She gives clear reasons why she believes Murat is lying in this interview. He seems not the least bothered about having been falsely accused of abducting Madeleine McCann. This, in my opinion, shows he was probably a willing patsy.